was actually the time I did that the first time that you just saw. I went back there and went, what done? What came over me? Who am I?
For nearly 3 decades, Burt Reynolds told anyone who would listen that Sally Field was the love of his life. He said it to Vanity Fair. He said it in interviews, in documentaries, in casual conversation, right up until his death in 2018. It became one of those stories the public simply absorbed as fact, the biggest movie star in America, still pining decades later for the one woman he let get away. But Sally Field never confirmed that story. She never denied it outright either. She just stayed quiet for year after year while he kept telling his version to the world. Then, in September 2018, 12 days after Reynolds died, Field published a memoir called In Pieces, and for the first time, she told her own version. It was not the romance the cameras had sold audiences in the 1970s. It was something far more complicated, and it reached back into a part of her life she had never spoken about publicly before. To understand what that relationship really was, you have to start with who Sally Field was before Burt Reynolds ever called her. Field became famous young, but the fame worked against her for years. She played the title role in Gidget in 1965, then spent 3 seasons as the title character in The Flying Nun, a sitcom about a lightweight novice whose oversized habit let her fly. Sight index equals 2-1. Casting directors came to think of her as a silly, lightweight actress because of those early sitcom roles /sight. That reputation followed her into her 20s. She kept working, but she could not get taken seriously for the kind of dramatic roles she wanted, and for while it looked like her career might stall out entirely under the weight of 2 characters she had outgrown a decade earlier. The breakthrough came in 1976, when Field took the title role in the television movie Sybil, playing a woman living with what was then called multiple personality disorder. The performance was raw enough that it changed how Hollywood saw her almost overnight. She won an Emmy for it, and suddenly directors and stars who had ignored her for years were calling. One of the people who reached out was Burt Reynolds. That timing matters. Field did not meet Reynolds from a position of security. She had just fought her way out of a long stretch of being dismissed by her industry, and she was still uncertain whether the new respect she was getting would last. Into that uncertainty stepped a man who was, at that moment, arguably the most famous actor in the world. Field and Reynolds met on the set of Smokey and the Bandit in 1977. She later told Diane Sawyer that they had known each other for only 3 or 4 days before it felt like sight index equals 10-1. For days it felt like 4 years, and that the two of them looked deeply entangled on screen /sight. The film became one of the biggest hits of the year, and their on-screen chemistry was a large part of why. Audiences loved them together. What audiences could not see was what Field said was underneath it. Speaking to Sawyer years later, she described the relationship as never simply a love affair. Sight index equals 10-1. She said there was an ingredient between them that had to do with her caretaking, and with his need to be taken care of /sight. She was 30, he was 40, and at that point, arguably the biggest star in the world, coming off Deliverance and a run of major hits. From the beginning, by her account, the relationship settled into an uneven shape, her tending to him, and him needing constant tending. Years later, Field came to believe that dynamic was not new to her. She said it was something she had been prepared for long before she ever met Reynolds. In Pieces, Field wrote for the first time about being sexually and emotionally abused as a child by her stepfather, the actor and stuntman Jock Mahoney, known in the family as Jocko. Sight index equals 11-1. She said Mahoney would regularly summon her to his bedroom when she was young /sight. What made the experience so disorienting, she explained, was that Mahoney was not simply a frightening figure. Sight index equals 11-1. She wrote that it would have been easier if he had only been cruel and frightening, but he wasn't. He could be magical, a kind of Pied Piper with the whole family entranced by him /sight. That combination, warmth and harm coming from a same person, is a pattern trauma researchers often describe as teaching a child to associate love with danger and to seek approval from the very source of the hurt. Field has said directly that she saw the same pattern reemerge when she started seeing Reynolds. Sight index equals 3-1. She has said that she fell into old patterns when she started dating him /sight, and in the memoir she described herself as having been shaped, long before adulthood, to gravitate toward exactly that kind of dynamic. A tabloid interview tied to the book's release quoted her describing the Reynolds relationship as an attempt to recreate a better version of what she'd lived through with her stepfather, an effort in her words, at site index equals 11-1, exorcising something that needed to be exorcised and trying to make it work this time/site. She also disclosed in the memoir that she had an abortion in Tijuana at age 17, years before she met Reynolds, one more marker, in her telling, of a young adulthood in which she had already learned that her boundaries were not fully her own to protect. Across her memoir and later interviews, Field described Reynolds' control over her in specific terms. Site index equals 5-1. She wrote that by the time they met, the weight of his stardom had become a way for him to control everyone around him, and that from the moment she walked through the door, it became a way to control her/site. She has also described the relationship in blunter, more physical terms, telling People magazine it was both wonderful and frightening, and admitting to feeling both drawn to him and unsettled by him at the same time. The clearest flashpoint she has described involved her decision to take the lead role in Norma Rae in 1979, the story of a Southern textile worker who becomes a union organizer, built around the now iconic image of Field's character standing on a factory table holding a hand-lettered union sign. According to Field, Reynolds did not want her to take the part and reacted with anger when she pushed back. Site index equals 6-1. She has said that when she stood up to him about it, he told her she was letting it get the better of her, and she answered that this was the better of her/site. She went and met with director Martin Ritt anyway, and made the film. Field has said that playing Norma Rae changed her at a level that went beyond her career. Site index equals 6-1. She said that learning to stand in the character's shoes let her feel her own legs get stronger, and that portraying how the character grew up made her start to grow up too, until she eventually would no longer allow herself to be manipulated and humiliated, and ultimately left/site. That is a striking claim, that a film role did not just advance her career, but gave her the internal footing to end a 5-year relationship she had come to see as harmful. The professional tension continued even after the film was finished. Field has said Reynolds did not support her the way she needed when the film succeeded, including at the 1980 Academy Awards, where she was nominated for Best Actress. By her account, he was unpleasant with her around that time and downplayed her chances of winning. She went to the ceremony without him and won the Oscar. 5 years later, she won a second Best Actress Oscar for Places in the Heart, the film that produced her famous, often misquoted acceptance line about being liked. Field and Reynolds were together for about 3 years, then on and off for roughly 2 more, before she ended it in the early 1980s. Site index equals 8-1. She has said that after that, she barely spoke to him again for the rest of his life, and that she would sometimes feel him reaching out to her indirectly through the press, something he had done even while they were dating/site. That distance lasted roughly 30 years, all the while Reynolds continued to publicly describe her, in one interview after another, as the love of his life, including in a well-known 2015 remark to Vanity Fair. Field's silence, by her own account, was not born of anger so much as self-protection. She has said she was always flattered when he called her that, but that site index equals 9-1, he was a complicated man/site. She did not, in other words, dispute that something real existed between them. She simply chose not to let a public gesture of nostalgia reopen a chapter she had worked hard to close. What gives in pieces some of its credibility, according to Field's own account of writing it, is that she spent roughly 7 years working on it, largely believing it might never see print at all. She has said that assumption is part of why she felt free to be candid about Reynolds. She wasn't writing with an audience or a reckoning in mind, at least not at first. The timing that followed was accidental and, by her telling, unwelcome. Reynolds died of a heart attack on September 6, 2018, at age 82. The book was already scheduled for release on September 18, 12 days later. Field has said repeatedly that she felt no sense of vindication about that timing. In interviews promoting the book, she said she was glad that he would never read it, explaining that site index equals 9-1. She felt relief he wasn't going to read it, wasn't going to be asked about it, and wasn't going to have to defend himself or lash out, because she did not want to hurt him any further/site. That is a notable thing for someone to say about a person she has just described in the same book as controlling and emotionally abusive. It suggests Field's account was not built as score settling. She has been consistent in saying the relationship contained real affection alongside the harm, describing it elsewhere as confusing and complicated, not without caring, but deeply hurtful to her at the same time. What makes this story unusual is not just the abuse disclosure. It's the fact that two people who lived through the same relationship walked away with almost entirely incompatible memories of it, and only one of them is still alive to keep telling his. In Reynolds' version, told and retold across nearly 40 years of interviews, Field was the one who got away, the partner he should have ended up with, the regret he carried for the rest of his life. In Field's version, published only after he could no longer respond to it, Reynolds was someone whose fame had become a mechanism of control, who reacted to her growing independence with anger, who wasn't present for her biggest professional wins, and who reactivated patterns she had first learned as an abused child. Field herself has pointed out that her account leaves room for his feelings. She has never denied the relationship contained real love. His version, as she has framed it, only holds together if her account of the control and the fear is left out entirely. That asymmetry, more than any single detail, is what her memoir was ultimately trying to correct. Not the existence of a love, but the completeness of the story that had been told about it for 30 years.